Okay. Ready to roll, Chair Rogers?
Here.
Director Melanie Bagby, I don't see yet. Director Chris Court.
Melanie said she was in purgatory. She might be one of the phone numbers. I know she was dialing in. And I do see Director Gurney with her hand up as well.
Oh, right. Oh, give me just a second. Right now. Okay. I can't bring in the phone for an interesting reason.
I don't think those numbers are Director Bagby's, at least not the ones I have for. Oh, no, it is. Yep, it is. I see that one now.
Okay. So I'll just do allow to talk, Director Bagby, but unfortunately, I'm not able to get you into the panelists section through the phone number.
All right, and I think Director Bagby was only a few minutes away from her laptop, so we'll go ahead and we'll proceed as we are at the moment, and she'll just have to join us as she can.
Wonderful, sounds good. So on the roll, Director Melanie Bagby. There. Director Chris Corsi.
Here.
Director Delinda Fisher.
Here.
Director Gerard Giudice.
Here.
Director Sarah Gurney.
Here.
Director Linda Hopkins.
Present.
Director Ariel Kelly.
Here.
Director Mark Landman.
Here.
Director Sandra Lowe.
Here.
Director David Rabbit. Director Rosa Reynosa.
Here.
And Chair Chris Rogers.
Here. And so we do have a quorum, so welcome everybody, and thank you for being here. Let's go ahead and start our day with public comment for our non-agenda items. If someone in the public has a comment on something that falls within SCTA and RCPA's jurisdiction, but is not on today's agenda, hit the raise hand feature on your Zoom. We'll have 3 minutes. Drew, let's go ahead and start with Eris Weaver.
Alrighty, Eris, I've permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
All right, thank you. I'm Eris Weaver with Sonoma County Bicycle Coalition, and I'd like to wish everyone a happy Bike Month. As usual, May is National Bike Month, and we have a whole lot of different activities happening. On Wednesdays, we have after-school classes for kids learning how to ride their bike in a variety of locations. This Wednesday evening, we have a webinar on what to do if you're in a crash, because a lot of people aren't as prepared as they might ought to be, and we'll learn some things there. Next week on the 18th is the Ride of Silence, in which we memorialize cyclists who've been killed on the roads. We will have rides in Sonoma, Sebastopol, in Petaluma. And then Friday, the 20th is Bike to Work Day, and we'll have Energizer stations in a variety of places. And we'll also have a happy hour afterwards. That one will be in Windsor. All of the details on all these events are at bikesonoma.org/BTWD, Bike to Work Day. My other comment, I see that farther on the agenda, you'll be talking about some legislative actions, and I don't have a comment specifically on those bills that you mentioned, but I did notice that there is zero overlap between that list of bills and the list of bills that the California Bike World is hoping will get passed. So I am going to send staff information about those bills, because a lot of them are policy, not necessarily infrastructure, but are all related to making things safer for cyclists and pedestrians, and think it would be great for SCTA to have a position on those as well. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Eris. Chair Rogers, I don't see any other members of the public with their hands raised. And
okay.
I also did not receive any pre-submitted public comments also.
Okay, we'll keep moving through this then. Suzanne, let's go to the consent calendar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We do have a fairly robust consent calendar today. Did you want me to mention anything in particular, or just highlight the items, or?
Let's go ahead. We have the list in front of us. I do see that Dana has her hand up. Was that an accident, Dana? Okay, I'll open it up for directors. Did anybody have any questions or want to pull any items off of today's consent calendar? I'm seeing a bunch of shaking heads. All right, let's go to public comment on the consent calendar.
I do not see any members of the public wishing to speak on this item.
Okay. Then Suzanne, specifically, I wanted to call out item 3.13. It's our resolution and commendation for Willard Richards. And I was wondering if you could just read it, since normally we would have an opportunity to present it in person. And I do know that Willard is on the call today with us as well. And so if you don't mind reading it, and then we'll do additional public comment on that item so he can speak if he'd like to.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the resolution is of the board expressing appreciation for the service of Willard Richards as a member of the Citizens Advisory Committee for the SCTA for 18 years. Willard served on the Citizens Advisory, it's easy for me to say, the Citizens Advisory Committee as a representative from the League of Women Voters of Sonoma County, as well as the Sonoma County Transportation and Land Use Coalition since 2004. Willard has been a diligent attendee and participant in countless public meetings where his attention to detail and ability to look to the future were welcome additions to the dialogue. And Willard Richards has been a leader on active transportation, climate change, transit, smart Measure M, and Go Sonoma, as well as comprehensive planning. Whereas his tenure on the CAC, during his tenure on the CAC, Willard Richards helped develop our local tax measures, oversee project delivery by local project sponsors who received Measure M funds. He helped analyze financial audits for Measure M, edit and fact check the Measure M strategic plans and annual reports. And whereas Willard Richards was a staunch advocate for the establishment of passenger rail and a supporter of bus transit and bicycle infrastructure. And whereas Willard Richards engaged in numerous planning efforts, including several iterations of the Comprehensive Transportation Plan, the Countywide Bicycle and Pedestrian Plan, and the Shift Sonoma County Plan, as well as many others. Whereas Willard Richards steadfastly represented the League of Women Voters and the Transportation Land Use Coalition on the CAC, as well as the interests of Sonoma County residents. And he did so with kindness, courtesy, and a dogged commitment. So now therefore be it resolved that the Sonoma County Transportation Authority and Regional Climate Protection Authority do hereby express appreciation for the years of service given by Willard Richards as a thoughtful and dedicated member of the CAC.
And it's tough not being in person. I'd love to be able to do a round of ovation and a standing applause for everything that you've done, Willard. I see that you have your hand up. I am going to see if any board members have any comments before we go. All right, let's go to Willard.
Already, Willard, I've allowed you to speak.
I was greatly surprised and certainly most pleased to find this on the agenda. So I want to say thank you for this commendation.
Thank you, Willard, and thank you for everything that you've done for the county. We really appreciate it. Let's go to Director Corsi.
Thank you, Chair Rogers. And, I just want to express my appreciation for being able to tell Willard right now, thank you. I met Willard. I knew who he was when I was a reporter for the Press Democrat, because he was at every meeting that I went to, and many more. But I really got to know him when I went to work for SMART. And he took great interest in my first assignment at SMART, which was to write about 20 white papers on the project that were intended to answer all the questions that people had after the first failure of the ballot measure in 2006 and the coming second successful ballot measure in 2008. Will was incredibly helpful to me in writing about how much SMART would reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And no one had done much study on that, but he took it on, and with his, diligence and care and brilliance, he put those numbers together. He was always a calm, smart, effective advocate for transportation, for climate action. Still is, will continue to be so. And I just want to tell you again, Will, thank you for the help you've given me and for all you've done for Sonoma County and the North Bay.
Thank you, Director. We'll go to Director Gurney, followed by Landman.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, for giving me the opportunity to thank you, Willard, in person. I just have to say, I think words of thanks are inadequate in this situation. What can we say? Your endurance, your constancy, your commitment, and your dedication are of a nature that we only hope we'll find in the next generation. You've inspired so many of us, and we're so grateful for you being there as like the pillar for us. Thank you again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, the first time I was fortunate enough to meet Mr. Richards was, a little over a decade ago, I think. We actually had an action in our town that was looking at banning the use of roundabouts. And Willard was one of a group of people who were motivated by a better future for transportation and hopefully for our environment in the community. And was someone who came down and regularly met with us, worked with us, and tried to help us grapple with the issue, come to real facts, and something that unfortunately kind of devolved into more of an emotional issue. And I remember as soon as I met him and listened to him, being very impressed by one, his intelligence, his passion for what he was doing, but how willing he was to spend time and truly wanted to help us. And I think I saw that regularly for years after at SCTA. I've always appreciated the way he's helped guide our discussions and appreciated his comments, certainly. So Willard, thank you very much. You're appreciated very deeply around here.
Are there any other hands from board members? Okay, if not, I will entertain a motion on the consent calendar.
So moved, Healdsburg.
Second, Rutherford.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any additional discussion on any of the consent calendar items?
Chair Rogers, I do see a member of the public with their hand up. I do want to open up for public comment again for this specific item, or?
Sure, go ahead.
All right, let's see. Alrighty, Rick Lutman, I've permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Thank you, Drew, and thank you, Chair Rogers. I'm Rick Lutman. I am Willard's successor on the CAC as the appointee of the League of Women Voters. And he's still on the CAC, but in another role. I just want to say how much I appreciate him as a mentor, as an inspiration, as a role model. And although I can't speak officially for the League, I'm sure that all the folks in the Sonoma chapter are very grateful for the services that Willard has performed over the years. He's been a major pillar for the Sonoma chapter of the League. So Willard, thank you very much, and we will miss you.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Rick. Next we have Steve Bertelbaugh. Steve, I've permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Yes, I am really happy to see this resolution before you. When I moved to Santa Rosa from Sacramento, I saw the empty railroad tracks and started to inquire about what was going on. And Willard was a great source of information about what had been going on and how the situation had evolved. I've worked with him on the Transportation and Land Use Coalition, and his guidance and his approach has been a fantastic asset. I really am glad to see this resolution. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Steve. Chair Rogers, I don't see any other members of the public wishing to speak on this item.
Thank you, Drew. We have a motion and a second. Let's go ahead and call the vote.
All right, Director
on the
Bagby.
consent calendar.
Director Bagby. Director Corsi.
Yes.
Director Fisher.
Yes.
Director Giudice.
Yes.
Director Gurney.
Aye.
Director Kelly.
Aye.
Director Landman.
Yes.
Director Lowe.
Aye.
Director Rabbit. Director Reynosa.
Aye.
Vice Chair Hopkins.
Aye.
And Chair Rogers.
Aye.
And that passes.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Let's move on to our regular calendar then for today. Let's go to item 4.1.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and directors. So each year, the SCTA issues a call for projects for the Transportation Development Act, Article 3 funds, and adopt a program of projects. The Transportation Development Act funds are generated from a statewide quarter-cent sales tax, and Article 3 of these funds, referred to as TDA 3, are a 2% set aside for bicycle and pedestrian projects. SCTA allocates TDA 3 funds to Sonoma County jurisdictions based on their population, and matching funds are not required for this program. Any unused entitlement for the for each year is accumulated as a credit. The total funding available for programming in fiscal year 22-23 for Sonoma County was about 1.8 million. And this year we received applications for 3 projects totaling roughly 822,000. Some jurisdictions with larger accumulated funds said that they plan to hold on to their balances and apply next year. So the 3 projects submitted this year are State Route 37, sorry, wrong project, State Route 116, ADA curb ramps, and Bodega Avenue intersection improvements. Those would be matching funds in Sebastopol. Improvements to Lynch Creek Trail from Edith Court North to BayREN Street in Petaluma, and Highway 101 bicycle and pedestrian overcrossing matching funds in Santa Rosa. We allow jurisdictions to borrow ahead up to 2 years of their annual allocation. And Santa Rosa did take advantage of this and borrowed ahead just 46,000 for their project. This program of projects was recommended by the Countywide Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee at its March meeting. And the projects have also been approved by the applicant's local councils. So staff is recommending that the board approve this program of projects for submittal to MTC.
All right, thank you. Do we have any questions from the board? Seeing none, let's go to public comment, Drew.
I do not see any members of the public who wish to speak on this item.
Okay. I'll bring it back and see if we can get a motion on the table.
Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to move that.
All right. And Director Fisher, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was going to make the motion, but I'll second it.
Perfect. We have a motion and a second. Director Gurney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would so appreciate everyone's support on all 3 of its projects. I just want to point out, as to Sebastopol's project, I can tell you when I was the mayor in 2016, the Bodega Avenue safety corridor was my top priority. And here we are now at 2022, we're still looking to improve that. The ADA ramps, you can understand, are significant, but also the pedestrian improvements. When we look at one at Florence Avenue, that is connecting our citizens and our tourists to the Florence Avenue sculptures, a big draw. And the other one to across Bodega to Leland Avenue to our, what we call our boutique in-town farm. So I would very much appreciate everyone's support for all 3 of these items. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Director. All right, I see no other comments. Let's go ahead and call the vote. Drew?
Director Bagby. Director Corsi.
Yes.
Director Fisher.
Yes.
Director Giudice.
Yes.
Director Gurney.
Aye.
Director Kelly.
Yes.
Director Landman.
Yes.
Director Lowe.
Aye.
Director Rabbit. Director Reynosa.
Aye.
Vice Chair Hopkins.
Yes.
And Chair Rogers.
Aye.
That motion passes.
All right, let's move on to item 4.2.
All right, so this is for the Transportation Fund for Clean Air County Program Manager Fund, which is 40% of the revenues derived from a $4 vehicle registration surcharge in the Bay Area Air Quality Management District. SCTA manages this program for Sonoma County, and the other 60% of the program is managed by the Bay Area Air Quality Management District. These funds are available for projects within the portion of Sonoma County that is in the Bay Area Air Quality Management District. So according to criteria adopted by this board in 2006, a portion of these funds are guaranteed to Santa Rosa, Petaluma, and the county for local bus transit projects based on the population share of their service areas. And the remaining funds may be applied for on a competitive basis by public agencies for projects within the air district. The proposed program of projects for fiscal year 22-23 includes 6 projects. These are a match for an electric bus purchase for Sonoma County Transit, matching funds for an electric bus purchase for Santa Rosa City Bus, a bicycle parking program for 100 bicycle parking spaces for the city of Santa Rosa, continuation of a transit marketing program for Petaluma Transit, a bicycle parking project, also 100 bike stalls for City of Petaluma, and a commute program managed by SCTA that would provide ride matching services and incentives for people to commute by transit, bicycle, walking, carpool, and vanpool through the Ride Amigos platform. So Sonoma County jurisdictions would receive approximately $602,000 to implement these projects, and SCTA would receive approximately $39,000 to administer the program. Staff has reviewed the projects for their compliance with the Air District's program policies and cost effectiveness thresholds. The program of projects was also reviewed by the Transit Technical Advisory Committee and the Technical Advisory Committee at their respective April meetings, and was recommended for approval by both committees. So staff is recommending that the board approve this program for submittal to the Bay Area Air Quality Management District. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Do you have any questions from the board? All right, seeing none, Drew, let's see if there's public comment on this item.
I do not see any members of the public who wish to speak on this item.
Okay, I'll go ahead and bring it back for a motion.
So moved.
Second?
Moved by Director Giudice and seconded by Director Kelly. No further discussion. Let's call the vote.
Director Bagby, Director Corsi,
Yes.
Director Fisher,
Yes.
Director Giudice,
Yes.
Director Gurney,
Aye.
Director Kelly,
Yes.
Director Landman,
Yes.
Director Lowe,
Aye.
Director Reynosa,
Aye.
Vice Chair Hopkins,
Aye.
and Chair Rogers.
Aye.
That motion passes.
All right, thank you, directors. We'll go to 4.3.
I think Shauna is entering the panel as we speak.
Sorry about that.
There we go. Good afternoon, directors. I'm going to share my screen real quick.
We're good, Shauna.
Great, thank you.
Good afternoon, directors. Let's try again now that I'm all stitched. This presentation will provide a brief summary of the SCTA funding program cycle 1. The name has recently been changed from the 2021 SCTA funding program to reflect the ongoing nature of the program and to prevent the name from causing any confusion. Staff is seeking approval from the board today on the evaluation criteria and scoring rubrics. First, let me provide a review of what has happened to date, what needs to happen today, and what the next steps are. SCTA staff developed this funding program in anticipation of several funding types needing to be obligated around the same time period. The thought was to consolidate call for projects into one funding program that would be able to review priority projects submitted by sponsors and evaluate which funding sources best fit with which projects. One of the major fund sources under consideration is the One Bay Area Grant Cycle 3, which includes Surface Transportation Program, or STP, and Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Program, or CMAQ, federal funds. The call for projects for all available funding sources was completed last year. Recently, MTC finalized their the review of each county transportation authority's process and released the OBAG 3 application and authorized each county transportation authority to issue their calls for projects. SCTA's call is already complete. We are proceeding to the next stage, which is for the board to approve the evaluation criteria and scoring rubrics to be used for the priority projects submitted last fall. That's what you see here under number 2. Our next steps after approval will be to evaluate the projects and develop a draft list of projects to be programmed with the available funding. Staff plans to bring a draft program recommendation to the board in July and final proposed program recommendations in September. For the projects proposed to receive funding in OBAG 3, that list of projects will need to be submitted to MTC in September. Ultimately, MTC will release their staff recommendations for funding in December with a commission approval in January of 2023. Final program of project recommendations will be brought before the board after MTC approves OBAG 3 projects, and that would happen in January or February of 2023. I'd like to speak briefly about the evaluation criteria and the types of projects that will be eligible for funding. In OBAG 3, the types of projects fall into these 4 categories. Growth framework implementation, which is projects that are in or serve PDAs. Complete streets and community choice. Climate conservation and resilience. And multimodal systems operation and performance, which are mostly transit projects. Projects that are not eligible for federal funding are in OBAG 3 include air quality non-exempt projects, new roadways, roadway extensions, right-of-way acquisition for future expansion, operations, and routine maintenance. Moving on to the SCTA funding program, the proposed evaluation criteria and rubrics before you today were developed based on criteria established in the Go Sonoma expenditure plan and are meant to evaluate the proposed project's ability to address, among other things, equity priority communities, mode shift potential, safety, public engagement, emissions reduction, congestion reliability and traffic flow, and infrastructure condition. The evaluation criteria were circulated to the technical and citizens advisory committees to solicit input. The criteria were not ready in time for the CAC meeting, but they were emailed out to the committee to request input. The criteria were presented to the TAC at their regular meeting, and the TAC recommended approval of these evaluation criteria to the board. One member of the CAC was able to attend the TAC meeting and ask questions and provide comments. So staff is recommending that the board approve the proposed SCTA funding program evaluation criteria and scoring rubrics included in your addenda packet this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shawnee. Let's see if there's any questions from the board. Director Kelly.
Thank you. And thank you for the explanation, Shauna. I had a question on our packet page 143. The total of that scoring rubric is 200, but on your slide 7, it was 185. I was trying to do some quick math to see if there was a difference or if it was just a rounding
It's a
error.
typo. I
Okay.
apologize. It's a typo. It should be 185 total points.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Director Corsi?
Does it need to be 185? Because I'd like to make it 200 by doubling the equity and the education and employment categories.
I'm happy to take direction on that, Mr. Corsi. Absolutely.
Any other questions from the board? Director Kelly, are you putting your hand back up?
Yes.
Go for it.
While I think it's not a question, but it's more to the, I think weighing equity more heavily, but not in support of the equity priority community designation per MTC having more weight in the scoring, because that would be problematic for many cities who have challenges that relate to equity issues, but don't score within the narrow confines of MTC's new definition for equity priority communities, which is unfortunate because it does preclude most cities in Sonoma County.
So let's go ahead, let's stick to questions, and then we'll get a motion on the table after we hear from public comment and can get into a back and forth if that's how the board feels. Director Landman? You are also muted.
We could have given everybody a break and left me muted. This is all on you, Chair Rogers. So I wanted to ask staff, they give me a rough idea. So if we were to increase the equity priority point, double it, I guess, to 20. So obviously this is worked through with staff, including representatives from our various jurisdictions, our staff people, our technical group, with the assumption that it was fairly balanced, so that if two projects were relatively close and one did serve an equity priority community, that that would give it the nod, which I could probably support. I'm curious if this puts this out of balance a bit and puts it in a position where this starts perhaps precluding other projects than when assessing all the other issues, which are pretty related to what we do in transportation and important, might make them not pass. Is there any way to get an estimate of that without going back through the TAC? Can anybody speak to that today offhand, if that changes that calculation to a notable degree?
Suzanne looks like she wants to say something.
I know it's a difficult one.
I don't. I think the weight of any of these items, is up for discussion. Certainly, this was our sort of best assessment based on transportation needs, I guess. And when I say needs, I mean just having sort of a broad view on how transportation projects evolve in jurisdictions, and a long history of the needs outweighing the available resources to meet them. So really it is a policy discussion for the board to have as to how they want to have the evaluation criteria reflect certain priorities.
Okay, I think it's a well-intended idea. That's the one concern I guess I'd have, and we'll have to probably just weigh in on that without any complete certainty on how much any change like that would impact. So thank you for trying to speak to that. I appreciate it.
Director Hopkins?
Thanks. I just had a question on the project location. I was looking at the criteria of 0 to 20 points, and just this kind of gets back at sort of taking everything in context, I appreciate Director Kelly's concerns about not all of our priority sort of equity areas being reflected in the Bay Area's designation, but certainly having significance for us in Sonoma County, and that kind of looks like it talks about compact commercial areas, residential concentrations, or downtown community cores. I was wondering if that is sort of taken in context for rural communities, right? Which is that, our downtowns are perhaps not going to meet the same level of criteria that we would see, say, inside Santa Rosa or Petaluma. And then also wanted to mention recreation as one, because we have a lot of areas where folks go to parks, right? And they could potentially walk there from their homes, or they could get in a car and bike there. We see so this particularly along the river and the coast, but just wanted to sort of flag that as a potential location that could really truly achieve that mode shift that I think we're all going for. But just so kind of a little bit of question, probably slid a little bit of direction in there, but I guess my real question is, how do we kind of make this fit different types of communities when we have some larger cities and some smaller unincorporated areas, and then also a tremendous demand that I see in the areas that I represent for recreational opportunities as well?
Thank you, Vice Chair. I agree. That was our intent, was to try to identify, without drawing an urban boundary, those areas outside of the cities that would possibly qualify for these types of projects, or these types of funds without actually being an incorporated city. So, the Springs or out at the river or Forestville, we were trying to identify areas that by location and type of activity that would help them qualify. So yes, and we could certainly include recreational areas in that. I'd be happy to add that in if that is the direction of the board.
Are there any other questions? All right, let's go to public comment. Drew?
Alrighty, we have Rick Lutman in line. Rick, I have permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Thank you very much. As I mentioned before, I'm now a member of the Citizens Advisory Committee. And as Shauna told you, we did not get this list in time for us to discuss it at our last meeting 2 weeks ago. But I had a little exchange with Shauna earlier today, and got the issue of the arithmetic straightened out. I am a mathematics professor, so this is the sort of thing I notice. But I had some suggestions for tinkering a little bit with the numbers, and I made it to come out to 200. I'd like to suggest that number 1 be increased from 10 to 20. And I say that because we are, I think, as a society, coming to realize finally that low-income communities and communities of color have been neglected in our public discourse for some time. And I think it's important that we give some attention to that issue and make it clear that we know about it and we're doing something about it. And for the same reason, number 10, which is now shown as 5 points, I think that ties in with equity because it's making opportunities for employment more accessible. So I would urge that be raised from 5 to 10. I also suggest that number 4 on public participation be increased from 10 to 20 because there is a wide public perception that governmental boards are not paying sufficient attention to citizens' opinions. This has certainly been made clear to the SMART board recently, but I think it's true throughout our government. And on the other hand, to compensate for that, number 2 could be reduced from 20 to 10. It's not that getting people to switch from automobiles to other means of transportation isn't important, but I think it could be reduced a little bit. Anyway, with all these suggestions, the total does come out to 200. Thank you for your consideration.
Okay, thank you, Rick. Chair Rogers, I do not see any other members of the public who wish to speak on this item.
All right, I'll bring it back to the board. Let's start by getting a motion on the table for discussion. I see a hand from Director Fisher.
Yeah, I'm not, excuse me, I'm not prepared to make a motion, but I wanted to address the issue of mode shift because we know that we need like a 70% mode shift if we're in fact going to meet our climate neutrality goals in the city of Petaluma. So I would really not want to diminish that as the way staff has presented it.
All right, thank you, Director. Let's get a motion on the table. So Director Corsi, are you prepared to make a motion?
Yeah, I'll make a motion to approve this with the change of making the equity issue and the jobs and education issue or numbers double to 20 on equity and 10 on jobs and education. I want to point out that the math professor's way to get to 200 was more complicated than mine, but I'm a simple guy when it comes to math. The reason that I'm suggesting this, and first of all, I'm sure the TAC spent a lot more time with this than I have, and I want to respect their work, but I don't want to reduce any of the transportation portions of this because I respect that we need to pay attention to those. But I also think that it's important for us to, when we are making decisions about transportation, that we also consider our own values that we talk about all the time, and reflect that importance of social justice, even when we're talking about something like transportation. So I'll make that motion.
I'll second that motion.
So a motion from Director Corsi and a second from Director Giudice. Let's go ahead and go to Director Kelly, followed by Director Hopkins.
Would it be possible for staff to put up the equity priority community map to share with the directors and members of the public specifically what we're talking about when we're talking about the equity priority community map? Because I want to just encourage that I completely agree with what people are saying with regard to placing support and value on equity and making sure that we're investing in communities that have been underinvested or historically marginalized communities. I think that to be clear, people just might not be as aware of what the definition is that has recently changed with the new criteria as adopted by MTC.
But I'll also go to Suzanne while the map is up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to also highlight that our criteria allows for projects that are in non-equity priority communities to qualify based upon income too. So we do allow some flexibility in our scoring process that would enable, I think, maybe some of the concerns to be remedied. Having said that, MTC does have requirements for their funds. So, but we're not just talking about MTC's funds in this whole cycle. So hopefully there's an opportunity to, I don't know, finesse this in such a way that you were able to include projects in communities that aren't on this map necessarily, but meet other thresholds related to income.
Okay, we'll go to Director Corsi, followed by Director Hopkins.
Sorry, that's an old hand.
Okay, Director Hopkins.
Thanks. I was wondering if maybe a friendly amendment to the proposal would be considered by the motion maker, Director Corsi, to also add recreation to the location category. And I also want to acknowledge, and I guess this is maybe a question for staff, is that when I was looking to the employment opportunities and access to training education, unless actual schools are included, we don't have that in West County. So it's sort of like, I guess I'm wondering sort of how would an area that doesn't have, you know, say a college kind of be able to demonstrate kind of increasing employment opportunities or access to training and education? is that just something that we would not be eligible for at all? Is that really sort of like geared towards SRJC and SSU, or just kind of curious?
I think that was the intention, yeah.
So there's no way for other communities to receive any addition from that.
Include other types of schools.
There's the jobs component to it though, right?
So, but I guess, and then I wouldn't be a little bit confused as to how that was different from the one that was location, right? That talked about jobs and employment. So I guess I'm just trying to get a little bit of clarity on those criteria. Like if we're sort of supporting, right, or maybe schools like also fall in that category. I guess I'm just trying to figure out if we're double counting or how that would work.
Well, I don't think the intention was to double count, but certainly, and I can go back and look, but I don't. David looks like he's coming in and wants to say something, so I would yield the floor to him because he helped develop these criteria as well. So I would yield the floor to him if he wanted to add something at this time.
I'm bringing David in right now, just in case.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board, David Robert, SCTA staff. So for question number 10 on the employment opportunities and access to training education, this was kind of a catch-all type of question where we're looking at not only access to higher education, but also job training opportunities and employment opportunities, not only in the construction aspect of a project, but also in the access to improved job opportunities through new businesses and expanding businesses. So it was intended to capture not only the educational aspects, but the access to multiple different types of opportunities for community members. So I hope that helps.
Just a quick follow-up, if I may, through the chair. So it also includes sort of the job opportunities that would be part of the construction itself.
Correct.
Okay, great. That was very helpful. Thank you so much. And then I guess my follow-up question was for Director Corsi, if he would consider a friendly amendment to include recreation. I especially think of, the families that I see in West County trying to get to just a playground, and having to walk alongside the road. And so thinking about that as being just as critical as access to a school.
No, I don't have any problem with the friendly amendment. I'm still not sure I understand if or where it fits, but if we can find the right place, I'm perfectly fine with that.
Yeah, it's under the evaluation criteria for the location, and there were a few different types of locations called out, but I just was hoping to add recreation.
So just for clarification, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair.
Second of the motion is fine with it too.
Perfect. All right, go ahead, Suzanne.
Apologies. So under item 8, where it says employment centers, transit hub, schools, we could add recreational areas. Yep. Okay.
Okay. Director Landman.
All right. Yeah. Good discussion. It reminds me of something we talked about actually just, I think, a couple of months ago, not that many meetings ago. My colleagues may remember there was a suggestion, one of our packet pieces, that we consider creating a separate funding stream to help priority communities, equity priority communities. And while we were open to the idea and ultimately agreed, yeah, we're willing to assess these on a case-by-case basis, the problem was we recognized when we looked at the map here, at least as MTC defines it, it really misses large portions of the community and some areas, as our colleague from Healdsburg points out, they probably could use help, but due to the way it's been scored, they're kind of set aside. So we were willing to do that, but we didn't really want to create a separate funding stream because they knew that would impact the balance that we have in our funding formulas. I think I could certainly live with the 10% that's suggested here, because that just seems a fairness to me. If we have two things that are readily equivalent and one does help, even if it comes out of my community, and it's more going back to the county, I think I could support that because it just helps with something that's a long-standing problem. But I think if we start increasing that perhaps gets outside the balance that our TAC's spent a long time trying to achieve. So I'm not sure I could support that today. I wonder if there was a way to get towards an equity piece that actually included all the interests of all the participants and all the members of SCTA RCPA, I think I'd be a lot more interested in that. But I don't know if using this MTC overlay works, even though I respect the idea. So open to ideas if there's a way to get around that. But other than that, this map really kind of says it all. In our past perception of this and our past action was pretty clear. One thing we're careful about is trying to not upset all the work we put into the way we balance our funding formulas in this county.
Sure, thank you, Director Landman. I think Suzanne mentioned that the intent is there are two separate equity priority communities. We're sort of using a larger framework for equity priority communities for those fund sources that would be funded by SCTA, like Go Sonoma, but then there are the MTC categories. And so we're sort of using that first question to identify both so that we know which ones are eligible for OBAG, but also which ones it will help weight the ones that are not necessarily eligible for OBAG, but will still receive funding in other categories.
Are you suggesting that at the end of the process, by weighting those two things, we wind up back where we were with the more regular even division of funding between the areas of the county and the cities? That's kind of a guarantee that that really doesn't change that?
That's certainly the intent.
Then that makes it certainly easier for me. I'm more enthusiastic about supporting the 10 that the TAC recommended. But if that was the balance that kept us even, then we are kind of going out of balance by doubling that, are we not?
Certainly, it would create a heavier weight, but I mean, I take direction from the board on what the preference is.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Go to Director Bagby.
Oh, thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm glad to see that my unmute function works. On the app, it was not working on my phone, so I apologize for that. But I think I may be rephrasing the question from Director Landman, or maybe just asking for clarification from Shauna. So I think what I'm hearing is, and I'm just looking at this in reference on page 142, which is the OBAG 3 eligibility criteria. You know, if a city that is not in one of those economic disadvantaged areas or meets the MTC criteria, but we are checking if a project is checking a lot of boxes under complete streets and community choice, like a community does a complete streets program. Yeah, we are maybe checking some other boxes under the different categories. The other criteria, am I right in hearing what you're saying is that we're not necessarily disqualifying ourselves if we're not meeting some of the other weighted criteria? We still have a really good chance if we're checking the OBAG 3 boxes, or if you could kind of, just maybe give a practical example of a kind of project in a community that checks a lot of the boxes that are on page 142, and then maybe has a mixed bag in some of the other weighted areas. Could you just kind of give us a practical example?
Sure. So, I mean, the intent is to make these projects as competitive as possible when we submit them to MTC, but at the same time, we know that some of these projects don't qualify for the EPC label that is coming from MTC. So yes, I would say that if you are checking multiple boxes within those categories, that you're certainly going to be eligible. And the intent is the more boxes checked, the more likely you are to receive funding. So a project that doesn't necessarily qualify under EPC, but checks a whole bunch of other boxes, is still going to be relatively competitive under OBAG 3. Am I answering your question properly?
Yeah, I think so. And I guess it's, this is just this is very complex. This is very complex. There's just no way to get around it. And it's
very dense.
The difficulty is understanding what the outcome is when we start either tinkering with it or you know, trying to dive into it, which, you know, that's the job. So here we are. But I guess I'm kind of at the point where I'm looking at it as, you know, the page 142 is kind of like the cover sheet. And then the other criteria below it is kind of the additional supporting content.
That's correct.
And, yeah. Okay. So good. I'm looking at it.
Yeah. The cover sheet is essentially those things that are eligible for OBAG. So we know right away, we check the box, and at the very bottom of 142, it says this project is eligible for OBAG 3, and it's a yes or no. So we'll know if it's checking those boxes that it's eligible.
Okay.
And then it will compete. And I would like to point out that we will bring a draft program of projects to the board, and then the board can chew on it. And if we decide that there are projects, you decide, I don't have anything to do with it, that there are projects that need to be massaged or should have further consideration for some reason, then we can relook at those applications, and we'll bring a final list to the board for OBAG 3 projects in September. So you get to look at it in July, and then we get to take feedback, and then we get to look at it. You will look at it again in September.
Okay. Oh, thank you. That's very helpful. And I guess just knowing that we'll have that opportunity, that's a little bit more comforting today. My two big concerns that I wasn't necessarily seeing a balance in some of the things that we're talking about regionally is I don't see our aging population called out as much as I think it's a factor, and it's an acknowledged factor that, you know, we're about to drive off a demographic cliff. We have a huge wave of people who are retiring in addition to a population that's a little out of balance. And then the other second big piece of, you know, regional consideration that hasn't been called out is something that actually Director Hopkins already called out, which is the fact that, you know, ecotourism has been identified as a key part of our economic development plan. And so that needs to be a key point of our transportation considerations as well. So those are my two comments, but your explanations of how these pieces work together, I have to confess, I read this and was probably more confused than when I started, but your explanation has helped me kind of understand how the pieces work together. But so I'm fairly happy with it, except for those kind of two public policy pieces that I noted earlier. So thank you for your presentation and explanation.
Thank you, Director.
Director Hopkins?
Apologies, legacy hand.
It happens. Director Kelly?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I like legacy hand more than old hand. I wanted to add, in reference to what Director Bagby just shared around our aging population and kind of the demographic cliff that we see in looking out, you know, in Sonoma County, probably around the timeframe when these projects would be getting implemented. I wanted to just call attention to number 5, which is the improved public health metric, in looking at kind of where we've been over the last 2 years and where we've seen massive challenges around public health and some of those lowest quartile census tracts that we talked a lot about during kind of the peak of COVID, and where we were seeing massive disparities in public health. That could be an area in which we look to increase the score there in this criteria, to kind of give weight to both our elderly community and specifically the equity priority around communities of color who were disproportionately impacted by the negative effects of COVID, but all of the environmental issues that play into that, like air quality and location. So I just wanted to maybe consider that we could add some points to the improved public health section in number 5, which would probably get to some of the heart of what was discussed earlier.
Director Fisher?
I'm a little uncomfortable with tinkering with staff's recommendation, I must say. They've obviously given it a lot of thought, and I would suggest that perhaps what we do now is, after hearing these comments, that staff go back and maybe, think about how they might weigh things differently based on these comments, and adding in recreation and some other things. Just a suggestion.
Director Landman?
Director Fisher kind of read my mind. I noticed usually when we spend this much time and we're all doing multiple comments, that means we might not be able to solve it that particular day. And it's a good time to send it back to staff and let it come back again. One thing that came to mind after Director Bagby's comments, that staff's response might be useful to consider, is they mentioned that we could use the typical process with this coming in front of the board to revisit any projects we felt that perhaps didn't make the cut but should have. And I would suggest, I think that's a great idea, and I would suggest that could be used just as well, and perhaps even better alternatively, if we have some equity priority areas that the county feels perhaps didn't quite make the cut and should have. That is something we could revisit as a board. That is more deeply follows what we suggested a couple of months ago, that we were open to looking at these things, but we wanted to take them on a case-by-case basis. And it would follow some of the actions to this board in recent years, where many of us have agreed to, or at least said we were open to taking cuts in our projects if we get one more project across the line. I think we've developed a pretty good teamwork in this board in this last couple of years of doing that sort of thing. So I wanted to put that out there as something to bring back. We could use that to address any concerns, to make sure that we make sure there's an equitable distribution, there's that word again, of funding throughout the county, but at the same time that the MTC defined priority communities aren't left behind, and where possible can get a little extra help. So I would support doing that, and I would love to see that come back as well. I wouldn't be prepared to support it today, I think. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Director. Are there any additional comments on this? We do have a motion that's on the table. The motion is to support with the amendments offered by Directors Coursey and Hopkins. I also heard, and perhaps if that motion does not pass, it sounds like Director Landman might have a follow-up motion. But let's go ahead, and if there's no other comments, call the roll on the proposed motion.
All right, we'll start with Director Bagby.
Aye.
Director Coursey.
Yes.
Director Fisher.
No.
Director Giudice.
Yes.
Director Gurney.
No.
Director Kelly.
No.
Director Landman.
No.
Director Lowe.
No.
Director Rabbit. Director Reynosa.
No.
Vice Chair Hopkins.
No.
And Chair Rogers.
No.
4, 5, 6. That motion does not pass.
All right, I'll come to you, Director Landman, and see if you have a follow-up motion.
Well, I was tempted to move the original staff motion, but given the discussion, I think perhaps what I asked then is that we set this to the table and have staff bring it back with the direction they received from the board today, and perhaps adjust slightly and see if we can see something that works.
A second.
So we have a motion from Director Landman and a second from Director Fisher. I will say I'm going to support this motion, and part of it is I would like to see the information about what those proposed amendments are in terms of the impact that they would have on projects. I think that they're relatively good amendments if we can see sort of what we're actually committing to as we do it. Suzanne, you've got your hand up.
So we have a timing issue. If we don't have criteria today, we can't get to work scoring the projects and then bring you the draft list in June or July rather, and go to the committees in between so that we get to a final list in September. So if we, yeah, that's our constraint.
I'm hearing as the motion maker here that doesn't work. Let me try this and see if this works. It's not the direction I would have preferred to go at the moment, but I'd like to move the original staff motion with the provision that the board is committed to addressing individually in a case-by-case basis where necessary, if we need to help EPC projects cross the line if they perhaps fell short of their scoring.
I'd like to second that.
So we have a motion and again, a second from Director Fisher. Sorry, Director Bagby. Let's go to Director Kelly and then Hopkins.
Request for friendly amendment to add recreation to number 8.
Happy to. Thank you for reminding me.
And Director Hopkins's hand came down. I assume that's what you were looking for. Okay. Is everybody clear on the motion from Director Landman? Is there any additional conversation? Okay, staff is clear on the motion. Perfect. All right, let's go ahead and call the vote, Drew.
All right, Director Bagby.
Aye.
Director Corsi.
Yes.
Director Fisher.
Yes.
Director Giudice.
Yes.
Director Gurney.
Yes.
Director Kelly.
Yes.
Director Landman.
Yes.
Director Lowe.
Aye.
Director Reynosa.
Aye.
Vice Chair Hopkins.
Yes.
And Chair Rogers.
Aye.
And that passes.
Okay, thank you so much, directors. Let's move on to our next item, Suzanne. That's item 4.4.
Thank you. Too many windows open. Let me get down to that. We've got, is Ross on? There he is. So Ross is going to give a quick report out from the ad hoc unless Vice Chair Hopkins wants to kick it off.
Thank you, directors. Gonna share my screen, Drew.
Looks good, Ross.
Thank you, Drew. On May 2nd, the Funding for Climate Change Ad Hoc Committee convened to debrief on the recent webinar and discuss the next steps for the committee going forward. I'll briefly go through the debrief and propose next steps to update the board. Thanks to all who attended and helped to get the word out for the kickoff webinar on April 11th. The webinar that followed the brief SCTA RCPA board meeting on April 11th was well attended with over 60 non-staff or board member participants. The presentation content focused on the climate crisis facing Sonoma County and RCPA's role in implementing climate solutions. The webinar was recorded separately in both English and Spanish and is currently available on the RCPA website and our YouTube channel. Participants had a chance to comment and ask questions in the chat, as well as verbal questions at the end of the presentation. A follow-up email was sent to all attendees with the presentation materials and recordings, encouraging them to share the materials and survey within their climate-interested circles. The virtual audience was asked to complete a survey to express their climate change mitigation priorities and help define a vision for a climate-resilient Sonoma County. An online word cloud was also created during this presentation, which is seen here, with participants adding words and phrases that define this vision. Over 50 people, which is up from the last time we presented it on May 2nd. Over 50 people have fully completed the survey so far. It's still up and accepting submissions. And what you see is a brief sampling of answers from the survey. Full results to date are available on type form, and I'll be happy to share that feedback as requested. Please complete and share the survey if you have not. An end date has not yet been established. We will continue to use this. Future engagement options. We want to leverage our existing resources. That's going to be key to moving these efforts forward. Using and growing our list of supporters will be important, as will be involving RCPA resources like the Climate Action Advisory Committee. One proposal was to feature a standing agenda item that focused on the Sonoma climate mobilization efforts at each CAAC meeting and invite interested stakeholders and members of the public to attend. One thing that was discussed in the meeting that has come up often is what can people do now? Many of the webinar attendees are currently making individual choices to support climate resilience, but what can they do now to move this effort forward? And that is some of what we discussed. I'll get to those solutions in a moment. But very briefly, the presentation toolkit has basically been developed. We have begun scheduling presentations, the first being June 8th, the City of Santa Rosa. Thank you for that. We got that on the books today. So we're working on the marketing materials that you see to support these efforts. And also been moving forward to create a short video. Had some great success with the related video to State Route 37. So we're really looking to emulate that. Something brief but impactful. And in the meeting, we kind of discussed keeping this evergreen to make sure that we can use this as we go forward over the next several years. And that some of that could be in the initial design, but also making sure that we can modify it without a lot of time and cost to RCPA. And based on feedback, we also discussed creating a separate RCPA newsletter that specifically focuses on Sonoma climate mobilization efforts to serve as a reminder to recipients to be used to promote future climate activities. Content beyond our updates would include examples of other jurisdictions that have had success with climate mobilization efforts and funding. And a big one was defining committee structure. The meeting concluded with a discussion of the committee structure in the coming years. There have been suggestions of involving local climate leaders to focus on their sector of climate work with support of RCPA staff and board members. This organization is still being determined and will be presented to the Funding for Climate Change Ad Hoc Committee during the next meeting, which is currently scheduled for June 6th. Thank you for your time today, and look forward to answering any questions and updating you as this process moves forward.
Thank you so much, Ross. Director Hopkins, as the chair, I'm going to let you jump in here and see if you have anything to add.
Thank you so much. You know, the main thing that I want to add is really just that we want all of the directors to engage in this. We really want to launch a roadshow. And I also want to say thank you so much, Chair Rogers, for leading the charge with the presentation at the City of Santa Rosa. But we would love for everyone to take it back to their city and also beyond cities. If there are groups that you know of that you're actively engaged in, we really want to make sure this is an opportunity where everyone, you know, can help lean in and work with staff to make sure that their communities are heard from and representative and engaged in this process going forward. And one of our goals also is, as Ross mentioned, you know, to come back with some kind of a strategic, thoughtful proposal that we can then share with the board and you can all edit with respect to what is really the kind of driving force for this measure and kind of the governance for how it's developed moving forward, because we just all know that climate is very complicated and there are a lot of different sectors that we need to sort of bring into the process. And we also know that if you get too large of a group, it becomes very difficult for it to move forward. So we're having a lot of thoughts and conversations around kind of what that organizational structure could look like that would hopefully lead to a successful measure and a successful implementation where everyone feels represented and valued. So, and did I miss anything? Looking, we've got awesome other members, Delinda and Ariel. I don't know if you want to add anything or,
yeah, we'll go to Director Fisher.
Yeah, and thank you for adding that, Linda. A couple of things. I would love to see the results of the survey just with the 50 people who have dropped into it so far, and realizing that that's a fairly low number. Ross, do we have a goal? We haven't discussed it at the committee level, but do we have a goal as to how many responses we want to have to get a good representation of the county?
We do not have a specific goal. I believe the intent was to keep this up as we did kind of this presentation stage. But I defer to your opinions.
And do you think that the answers you're getting, have you sort of gone back to look at the survey to see if we're actually getting the information we really want?
I think it is valuable. there's no shocking things, but I was a little surprised, and I will share a link to the answers to the board this afternoon.
Great, thank you.
Director Kelly?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to add that I think as we talk about how to move this strategy forward and engage a really broad cross-section of residents across Sonoma County, the more that we can do now to engage our communities, to talk about this on our council agendas, and to post on our social media channels, to individually kind of all take this on as members of RCPA to say we really want to engage stakeholders and build, find out, do this survey, find out what people's priorities are and what they think about where we're at, and to really kick off this process with a meaningful engagement from everyone on this board. So we invite you to help us in that, please.
All right, anything else from any directors, any questions? Let's go to the public and see if they have any public comment on this item.
I currently do not see any members of the public who wish to speak on this item, Chair Rogers.
Great, we'll bring it back. It's a report item, so it doesn't need a motion. I'll just see if there's any last thoughts or comments from Suzanne or any board member. All right, let's move on to our next item then, item 4.5.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. So as part of the SCTA RCPA ongoing commitment to more equitably address transportation and climate needs of all Sonoma County residents, we took on the idea of developing a draft equity statement similar to what other public agencies around the Bay Area and the state have done. The purpose of this statement is to guide SCTA and RCPA in our work to maintain and improve the transportation network and address climate change. And it's meant to be sort of internal facing and how we look at our hiring practices. It's meant to be sort of mid-range facing, how we do our work, projects, programs, policies, and then also external facing, how we engage the community as a whole. So we worked with our staff and with an outside consultant and developed a draft statement, and then shopped that around with our advisory committees and held a listening session with local equity focused organizations. And so what we've included in the agenda packet is the original draft statement on page, I think it's 178. And in the staff report highlighted some of the feedback we received from the advisory committees and the listening session. And it was a somewhat diverse group of comments, ranging from, this was comments about it being a very powerful statement, others feeling it was too passive. We did hear feedback about accountability and the importance of this being a living document. And there were a couple of items that came up that would involve adding more to the statement, such as addressing language access, addressing communities that this was very focused on more racial and economic disparities than a broader sort of equity discussion. And so got some feedback on that. And so what we are aspiring to do today is to get feedback from this board about the content of the statement, how we might best use it, and take that feedback and then come back to you at a future meeting with the final statement for approval. So not asking for any approval today, more a discussion about how, what you think of it and how we might deploy it and how we might edit it or revise it based on your sense of it. So I'm happy to go directly to the statement if you want me to read through that or anything, Mr. Chair. We did, as I mentioned, focus on communities of color and low-income communities. And the sort of commitment in it is that we would address our community engagement practices to try and incorporate regular input from a more diverse set of residents, that we will, when we are hiring, attract, recruit, and retain a diverse set of people on staff, as well as with consultant teams and our advisory committees, that we would commit to creating equity criteria and to help to incorporate into funding formulas, to have some accountability by reporting out probably through our annual report or some regular mechanism to the board. And as I mentioned, we would commit to having this as a living document so that we can adjust as needed based on what the board sees the needs to be in the future.
Yeah, Suzanne, if you want to just go straight to the statement, and then we can do discussion around it after. And perhaps what we'll do is do the statement, do public comment, and then come back and sausage make if we need to.
So this is the statement, and I just kind of went through this part right here. There's some introductory pieces about, you know, our recognition of the responsibility to serve the communities more fully in terms of mobility, climate impacts. And I'll be honest, it says access to housing here, and I think that perhaps isn't the best word because we aren't a housing policy group. We are more of a support structure for those who do make land use decisions around housing. So we might want to wordsmith that a little bit. But the focus here is recognizing we should be designing policies that address inequities that have occurred or that are occurring in terms of mobility and climate. So I will hand it back to you, Mr. Chair, or to the board for thoughts or questions first and then thoughts.
Yeah, let's go to public comment first. Let's hear from the public on the statement. If you are interested, hit the raise hand feature. And we'll start with Steve Bertelbaugh.
All right. Okay. Suzanne, I'm going to take your screen for just a second for public comment. And then we'll start with Steve Bertelbaugh. Steve, I've permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Well, this is an enormous issue. Both the threats of climate change and the access to transportation are really fall very much on low income and people of color, and always have. And the funding streams that come in from the state and from the federal government are similarly affected. The efforts to shift funding to transit, for example, are always at the end of the line. A lot of preference is given to people who can drive anywhere, anytime. So this not only affects how we do things, it affects the whole funding stream. I'll stop there.
All right, thank you, Steve. Next we have in line is Eddie Alvarez. Eddie, I've permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Go ahead, Mr. Vice Mayor.
As long as you can hear me, right?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Well, not as a Vice Mayor of Santa Rosa, not as a citizen of Santa Rosa, but as a person who lives in an area that's highly concentrated with lower income and people of color. I just want to say thank you for keeping the inequity issue at the forefront and for addressing it. And I yield the rest of my time. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Chair Rogers, I do not see any other members of the public who wish to speak on this item.
Great, thank you so much. Suzanne, if you want to put the statement back up, and maybe it's best for us to give comments while it's on the screen so that folks in public and board members can visualize any changes that we're potentially making. I'll jump in to start, as you keyed in on the access to housing, and that was one of the things that I had taken a note on as well. You know, we don't have land use authority. We don't plan housing or approve housing as SCTA. So perhaps the best way to word that is in terms of mobility, climate impacts, and infrastructure for housing.
Sorry, I'm trying to remove the highlights. Yeah.
Or facilitate the development of housing. I'm open to board comments, but I think what you're going for here, if I can read between the lines, is approving the transportation projects that we need to be able to connect communities and address the climate impact of people getting between their jobs and where they live and where they play. And so my best suggestion is, and the infrastructure for housing would be how I would word it. Let's see if there's any comments from the board. Let's go to Director Lowe.
It's a small thing, but it's a word that I don't know, just it hits me in the wrong way. It's responsibility to serve those communities. Those just seem so off-putting. If there's a better word such as impacted, recognize responsibility to serve impacted communities instead of, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but the word those, I've heard it used and it's kind of, it just distances ourselves rather than embracing what's going on.
All right, Director Giudice.
Director Giudice, I think you're still muted.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I double pushed it. So thanks for the hard work of the staff on all this. I thought we might want to frame this from a little bit, Suzanne mentioned that this was an internal facing document. And I thought maybe framing it in such a way that saying something like SCTA RCPA recognizes racial, social, and environmental equity is an important American ideal. The conversations of ethnic and racial disparities in our country have made it clear that our organizations and people need to rededicate themselves and take actions toward creating a culture of belonging, equity, and racial justice. And I think that kind of speaks to what Director Lowe was saying too. And then go further on to say, we also recognize that we need to increase our efforts to ensure that all members of our community, regardless of race, ethnicity, age, gender, religion, sexual orientation, disability, and socioeconomic status, feel valued, safe, respected, included, and secure. And I think that kind of really frames it. And I was kind of playing around with that a little bit this morning while I was reading that, sorry. And I'm more than happy to share that verbiage.
Director Landman.
I was trying to write this down because you're getting some good comments here. I did notice, I tended to agree with the comment that this does seem to focus more largely on racism and economic disparities, and perhaps misses at least touching on gender differences, age, things like that. So that's just a general comment. Glad to see housing was flagged because I thought that as well too. I wasn't sure what we were going for there, but I had jotted down, were we thinking of like last mile service to transit, or simply providing infrastructure to allow people to go from their residence to jobs, goods, and services? So I think we're kind of going in the same direction. I like the way that Mayor Rogers put it, but that was the same thought I had. I'd like that clarified, at least, since we're indicating we have a responsibility. We should take responsibility where we don't have the jurisdiction to do something. So, but I get that housing and transportation do have a connection. I would agree with the comment about those. I didn't catch it at first, but as soon as it was pointed out to me, I picked it right up, and I bet other people would too. I wonder if we simply just say, we recognize a responsibility to serve our communities more fully indicating that perhaps we have not served them as fully as we have in the past, and we're all one community. Just a suggestion. I liked Director Giudice's comments at the end when he encompassed all the things that I thought might have been missed in terms of gender disparities, age. I think really encapsulated that, so I'd be comfortable seeing that rolled in. I had one thing I did want to bring up, though. It's one of the bullet points right in the middle of the page, creating equity criteria to incorporate into the funding formulas. And it caught my eye because what it says above that is that we commit to doing this. And one thing, as our previous discussion showed, I've always been leery about is being very careful with messing with our funding structure. It's proven it works, and it has been painstakingly and meticulously crafted over years. So I do like the concept, and I think I'm certainly open to discussion. I think everybody else is, and quite open to that. I'm just concerned about agreeing to say I commit to something like changing funding formulas, for example, until I know what those changes might actually be and what impacts that those could have on the revenues that our respective communities depend on. So with that, I would prefer to say something like that we commit to assess criteria to incorporate into funding formulas rather than create. That way, we're just saying we're going to assess it. And that way we haven't said we're doing something in case we get to a place where it's difficult. I think we've all learned in our years in politics that agreeing to pledges that are somewhat undefined, perhaps, no matter how good they sound, can have problems down the road. And that was just one thing that jumped out at me. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We'll go to Director Corsi, followed by Director Gurney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was going to go to the same bullet point that Director Landman did on creating equity criteria in the funding formulas. As Mark pointed out, that was the discussion we were just having a few minutes ago. And it's a key discussion to focus in on with this statement, because we're talking not about everybody here. We're not talking about all of our communities. We are talking about the communities mentioned in the first paragraph, communities of color and low-income communities. And the word "those," yes, it is jarring. We could replace it with "these" to refer back to that first paragraph, but just saying "our" or "all" doesn't identify what exactly we're talking about here. So if we are going to talk about communities of color and low-income communities, and creating equity criteria, it does mean taking a look at the fundamental criteria that we've had for all the time that SCTA has existed, which is not singling out any one community, but the criteria is based on population and road miles, as if all things are equal. What we're saying with this statement is that all things are not equal. So I think it's really important that we do this fully conscious of that. And if we want to change funding formulas based on the disparities that we see in these communities, then I just want to make sure that we're going wide open into that discussion because it's a fundamental change.
Thank you, Director. We'll go to Director Gurney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate staff's interest in having all of us write this by committee. That's always challenging for so many minds to get together on the wording. I appreciate the comments earlier of Director Giudice and Landman particularly. I'm interested in making sure we don't let go, or I should say that better, that we include communities with disabilities, with gender differences, and with age, because I think those are also in many ways marginalized in Sonoma County. So if we were to scroll down in this draft statement, we'll see a place where those might be added. I just want us to keep those in mind.
Okay.
Thank you.
Do we have any other comments from board members? Okay. I did have the same question that Director Landman had about the equity criteria bullet point, mostly specifically around the regionality of it so much as within each jurisdiction. I think one of the things that from my conversations with Director Landman, I think is very apparent is that everybody wants to support better access, better equity, and also making sure that we're able to take care of the communities within our own jurisdiction and that we don't lose funding that we would rather use to address those disparities in equity in our city-centered focus to other areas around the county, around other cities that might not be putting in the same level of effort or maintenance in addressing equity with their dollars as well. And so I don't know how to navigate that because I do think that it should be in the statement that we will be looking at that. I think it'll be a lot easier once we start to get actual dollars around how the equity criteria would impact funding formulas for each of our jurisdictions. And I think that this is one of the fundamental things. I do see that David has put his hand up, so perhaps he's going to offer a clarification that makes this a little easier.
Apologies, Mr. Chair, I accidentally raised my hand.
Well, that's just a letdown, David. So Suzanne, I will see if there's a motion that we can start with, get a motion on the table for discussion. And I'm looking for hands from board members. You'll have to actually hit the raise hand feature since we have the statement up and I can't see all of your faces at the same time.
I can stop share. And Mr. Chair, we don't need, well, is the motion to provide direction or is it, because we're not asking for approval?
If staff doesn't need us to make any type of a motion and you can synthesize what you've heard from each of the board members and incorporate it, I just always think it's helpful to ask.
Okay, I see. I appreciate that. I think we've heard what I will take as some clarity on being a little more expansive in the definition of equity. And then the comments about the equity criteria, I think we can go back and talk about what we've heard today. But if there are other,
I think and the wordsmithing around housing.
oh yeah, for sure that.
Okay, if staff is good, I'll do one last pass and see. Director Landman.
You're
I
still
tell you this, Mark, but you're still muted.
You cannot teach an old dog new tricks, that's for sure. I just wanted to make sure that we encompassed in the summation. I might have missed it. The recommendation to take a look at the first line of the second paragraph that says currently to serve those communities more fully. Did we have that?
Yes, got that.
Thank
And I would appreciate if Director Giudice could send the language that he read so we could incorporate that.
There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Excellent. Any other comments from the board? Okay. With that then, Suzanne, let's move on to 4.6. That's the annual budgets. I will say for directors, because we are running a little bit later in the day, we're not going to take a break. So if you do need to take a stretch break, get up, walk around, go ahead and turn your camera off. Just make sure we still have a quorum when you do so. And with that, let's move on to our budgets.
James.
Great. So we can do all four of the budgets in one presentation. There we have three presenters to go through them, and what I can do is I will kick it off and with a share screen here. Share screen, and then let's share this one here. And so these are SCTA RCPA preliminary budgets for fiscal year 23. And June of each year, right? I mean, by June of each year, the SCTA and RCPA must adopt 4 preliminary budgets for operations to continue the new fiscal year. The 4 budgets to cover are the RCPA, the Transportation Fund for Clean Air, Measure M, and the SCTA General Operations. So kicking it off, I'll pass it to Tanya, the Director of Climate Programs for the RCPA, to go through the RCPA budget.
Thank you, James. So this first slide just has some highlights about the RCPA that were formed in 2009. All of our staff are employees of SCTA, so you'll see those personnel costs reflected in the SCTA budget. And just a reminder that about 2/3 of our revenue and 1/3 of our funded positions are coming from our BayREN funding. And then lastly, that we continue to seek opportunities to implement our mobilization strategy, which was a lot of what we discussed earlier around the funding for climate ad hoc. Next slide, please. So first looking at our revenue and the key changes from FY 21-22 to 22-23. So in terms of our revenue breakdown, as I mentioned, about 21% of our revenue is for the RCPA programs. About 11% is for the Water Upgrade Save Capital, which is what's funding the Water Upgrade Save program improvements or projects. And then about 68% is for the BayREN Water Upgrade Save program and the energy efficiency programs. So in terms of changes, we do have budgeted an increase to support an expansion of the BayREN Water Upgrade Save program, which continues to grow with our second jurisdiction or utility on board with the City of Cloverdale. We also have included a 4.24% increase in local and regional contributions. And then lastly, we have accommodated in our budget a reduction in funding from our air district partners, which is based on our preliminary discussions about available funding. Next slide, please. In terms of expenditures, we do see or forecast an increase in staff salaries and benefits. Again, with the Water Upgrade Save program, we have increases in contracts and operational expenses for that implementation. And then lastly, and new this year, we have included an increase in funding or expenses for the outreach and engagement expenses related to our funding for climate ad hoc and the Sonoma climate mobilization. Next slide, please. So here is a summary of our proposed budget for a preliminary budget for fiscal year 22-23 for the board's review, and recommendation from staff is to adopt this budget. So James, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Tanya. So the second of 4 budgets is the Transportation Fund for Clean Air, which is managed by Dana Teray in our office. So I'll pass it to Dana to take us through the TFCA budget.
Thank you, James. So as I described earlier, under the item for the program of projects for the Transportation Fund for Clean Air earlier in this agenda, these funds come from the Bay Area Air Quality Management District and are distributed by a formulaic and competitive program. And this was described in item 4.2 on the agenda. Next slide, please. So since SCTA does manage these funds, we do need to develop and adopt a budget for this program. Changes to the TFCA revenue in the preliminary budget are due to increased estimates for DMB revenue, as well as rollover from a project that was completed under budget last year. Next slide. And since we did have increased revenues, that allows us to increase our expenditures. The expenditures you see here are essentially the program of projects that was approved earlier in this agenda. And next slide. And so here's a summary of the proposed preliminary budget and changes from last year's budget that staff is recommending to adopt. And I will turn it back over to James.
Thank you, Dana. So our third of the 4 budgets is the Measure M budget. As a reminder, the Measure M was passed by voters in 2004. It expires in 2005, but has extended with the Go Sonoma Act until 2045. The primary focus of this budget is that voter approved expenditure plan, as well as the board approved strategic plan. Revenue is currently at an all-time annual high, but our current projections are at 96% of our 2004 estimates. Changes in sales tax revenue by major industry group compared to the fourth quarter of 2020 to the fourth quarter of 2021 can be seen on this bar chart. The major industry groups of restaurants and hotels have rebounded 50% in the fourth quarter of 21 compared to 2020 with the lifting of the COVID restrictions. While the growth in online shopping has slowed with the recovery of brick and mortar retail. This slide, if you recall from last year and when we had the 2020 data, there was a question as to whether the online sales would continue to spike and brick and mortar would continue to fall, those lines would cross. Well, what's happened is with the lifting of those COVID restrictions, brick and mortar has made a comeback. So when you look at brick and mortar on a statewide basis, it's actually returned back to a pre-pandemic level, whereas growth in online sales has slowed but continues to grow. With regard to the quarter-cent sales tax that Measure M generates that we take in here at the SCTA to implement Measure M, our estimated growth when our fiscal year end closes for 2020 is going to be 8% growth. Our fiscal year 23 estimate, we're looking at a slow growth, only estimating 0.5%. So end of this year, when referring to a countywide sales tax in Sonoma, we're looking at $31 million revenue annually from a quarter cent. As a quick reminder of SCTA or Measure M's programs, there's the 7 programs, the Highway 101, the local street projects, and the bike and ped projects, as well as smart projects as the project categories, and then our apportionment programs for local bus transit, as well as local streets rehab, which are formulaic funds that are passed through by apportionment. And then, of course, 1% for administration. Of those 7 programs, that actually results in 10 different budgets that are presented to you within your board packet. Those additional budgets beyond the 7 are to address bonding of the sales tax measure. Looking at revenue for fiscal year 23, revenue is up approximately 4%. That's a combination of an increase in sales tax, a decrease in transfers in that was part of the bonding, the refunding of the 2011 bonds that we did last year, as well as interest earned decrease. With regard to expenditures, expenditures are down about 21%, and this is primarily results in contributions to other governments decrease. And what it is, you know, we pay Caltrans to deliver those 101 programs and manage that construction for us. So we're wrapping up that 101 program, and our expenditures are decreasing as we finish those jobs. We're delivering on our bike and ped program, and as we finish those projects within the bike and ped program, there's a reduction in those contributions to other governments. With that, the staff recommendation is to adopt the Measure M fiscal year 23 preliminary budget. And from there, I would transition on to our 4th and final budget. This is the budget that encompasses all the other budgets. SCTA, as Tanya mentioned, houses all of the staff who are working on RCPA, TFCA, and Measure M. It's our primary fund for operations of all that we do. SCTA was created by ordinance in 1990, and there's not any large takeaways in the budget. I would summarize the budget by saying we are in manageable financial shape. With regard to budget revenue, there is an increase in local contribution that's being recommended to the board. That's a 4.24% increase in those local contributions that has been to the Technical Advisory Committee and essentially follows CPI. There's also been an increase in transit integration funding, increase in federal MTC contribution, and then a decrease in the CRISA projects and programming fund. CRISA was the COVID relief where we got some additional projects and programming funding in the prior fiscal year. With regard to expenditures, expenditures are going down in fiscal year 23, but we do have increases in staff salaries and benefits. Those increases are based on anticipated merit increases, a 2.5% cost of living increase that's being recommended for all permanent filled positions, as well as salary adjustment to the executive director and the addition of a transit extra help position. So that transit extra help is now incorporated into the salary schedule as well. There's been a decrease in consultant services and an increase in contributions to government. This is just highlighting there's some ups and downs where the overall trend in expenditures is going down. With that, staff recommends adoption of the preliminary budget for SCTA, approval of the salary schedules, and approval of the local contributions. And that concludes the slide presentation to summarize the 4 budget items. Thank you.
All right, I apologize. It looks like I was having sound issues. Let's go to Director Fisher.
Yeah, I have a quick question about the RCPA budget. Are we still going to be doing work this next year with the Sonoma Clean Power? Because it was mentioned in the staff report that that's part of our funding, but I didn't see it as a line item.
Yes, we are expecting to continue work under 2 agreements for Sonoma Clean Power for the lead locally supported advanced energy center, as well as the transportation electrification. So we have the board under the consent calendar approved an extension of both of those agreements into the next fiscal year.
Okay, thank you.
Do you have any other questions from board members? All right, let's go to our public comment and see if anybody in the public would like to raise their hand and provide input.
I don't see any members of the public who wish to speak on this item, Chair Rogers.
All right. Well, first and foremost, I want to thank James and the team. You guys always deliver a great presentation, and it's easy and clear for everybody to understand. We are looking for action on this item. So I'll take them, if we can, as one motion, if somebody would like to move approval.
So moved.
Director Fisher?
We should figure out whether you want hands when we do this or not.
It's all good. I think the director from Rohnert Park jumped in there. So would you like to second his motion for approval?
I'd love to.
All right. Is there any additional discussion from the board? All right, Drew, please call the vote.
All right, Director Bagby.
Aye.
Director Corsi.
Yes.
Director Fisher.
Yes.
Director Giudice.
Yes.
Director Gurney.
Aye.
Director Kelly. Director Kelly. Oh, Director Ladman.
Director Kelly has left for a budget hearing for Healdsburg.
Oh, thank you. Director Landman.
Yes.
Director Lowe.
Aye.
Director Reynosa.
Aye.
Vice Chair Hopkins.
Yes.
And Chair Rogers.
Aye.
And that passes.
Excellent. Great work, team. Let's move on to item 4.7, legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Drew sent out to you, or will send out to you, an update on the status of the bills listed in the agenda. For the most part, actually, let me just pull it up real fast.
Here, I got it, Suzanne. I'll be able to share that as soon as it loads. There.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. There we go.
So good.
How's that?
It's very narrow. So the main thing I just wanted to check in on is the bills that we've been tracking, particularly related to particularly those carried by Senator Dodd, SB 852 about climate resilience districts, has gotten out of the policy committees and is in Senate appropriations. The transportation funding related bills that Senator Dodd is carrying, 1049 and 1050, which is the Highway 37 bill, are both on the suspense file in Senate appropes. The Grayson bill that Sonoma Clean Power was particularly interested in, it looks like it's been pulled by the author. I don't know if members from Sonoma Clean Power have more detail on that, but that bill is not moving forward. And then the others, the Gonzalez bill, oh, it was heard on the second. Shoot, I think it went to suspense. And the McGuire bill is over in the Assembly, the concurrent resolution calling for a climate emergency. And then the last thing I wanted to just mention is the gas tax holiday, or the idea of some sort of policy measure to address gas prices. The May revise will come out possibly on Friday, no later than the 15th. And we will see where that lands, but the legislature has not expressed any level of support for the governor's original proposal. So I wouldn't expect to see him continue pushing that if there's some negotiation to be had there. I appreciate Eris did send the list of bills that the Bike Coalition is interested in, so we will review that and bring back information to the board at the next meeting on some of those bills. And this was just an informational item, but happy to try and answer any questions or welcome any additional intel from board members.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Suzanne. And I know the timing for us is pretty good. We have a number of council members in particular heading up to Sacramento later this week for the League of Cities conference, where we'll be advocating for some of these. There were two bills that I messaged you about that have heard concerns about or questions about, and maybe would be worth adding some additional information to. The first is SB 917, and the other is SB 942. And I'm wondering if you can give a little bit of context for folks around those and perhaps update us as they move forward or not.
I can on SB 917, although I probably am not hyper up to date on it. This is a bill that would that is Bay Area specific and is addressing seamless transportation or seamless transit. The idea of sort of pressing the Bay Area to do more to consolidate or coordinate transit service. It had, in its original version, it had some pretty strong language and timeframes for which the region would be held accountable. And if the operators didn't meet them, they would lose funding. That created a good amount of concern from a lot of the operators. So I know there have been discussions with the author and some proposed amendments, and that they were getting closer to support, but I'm not sure where all the transit properties in the region have landed on that. It might be a little bit mixed at this point. And I am not familiar with 942. I apologize. I haven't had a chance to come up to speed on that one since you raised it.
All right, we can bring it back at another time.
Yeah.
Director Bagby?
Yes, just wondering if staff is also following SB 379 residential solar energy systems, specifically permitting. And I think that would be something that would be a natural for RCPA to monitor and advocate for, is that would be, you know, streamlining streamlining solar permitting at the city or county level.
I will check that out. No, I have not tracked that one.
Okay, thank you.
Was that on Sonoma Clean Power's?
I can't remember.
Policy
Any
list?
of my other fellow SCP board members remember if we're following that. Yeah, okay.
I'll check.
Too many numbers, too many letters, sorry.
Yeah, and then I apologize, Suzanne. I also have one more I was going to throw on the RCPA plate, and we are tracking it at SCP as well as through the mayors and council members. We sent an opposition letter, and that's AB 2838. It's a bill by Assemblymember O'Donnell, and it actually would remove the requirement for investor-owned utilities to provide a 100% green, local and green option. And so obviously, given what we've been able to accomplish in Sonoma County, that would be a step backwards from my perspective.
Got it.
All right, any other input from board members? All right, let's go to public comment on the item.
I do not see any members of the public who wish to speak on this item, Chair Rogers.
All right, we have a chatty group today, Drew. I like it. Let's bring it back. And I don't think we needed any additional direction on this, Suzanne, but just please keep us in the loop as these bills work their way through. That brings us to the end of our regular calendar. Let's go ahead and jump in and do our reports and announcements.
Mr. Chair, do you want to do the executive committee report or shall I?
So I can jump in. There isn't a whole lot from the executive committee. It's basically a preview of what we were doing here today in this meeting. So I don't know if you had something to add.
The only thing I would add is we are tracking whether or not the governor's executive order on
Thank you.
oh my gosh, what is it? An emergency, the pandemic, all of that, whether we can meet remotely, bottom line, is perhaps going to expire at the end of June. That's the rumor. And so pending any new legislation, if that's the case, our July board meeting would be in person. And there's not an opportunity for hybrid if it's the regular old Brown Act. So just wanted to put that on your radar that we may have to meet in person in July. Not that that's a bad thing, just for planning purposes. If you were on vacation in July, you might want to let us know so that we won't be able to make it. But we'll keep tracking what's going on with that and have an update in June.
So that means if you're in the public, keep watching for our agendas as well. At the top, it tells you location or how to access the meeting.
Yes, thank you.
I do see one hand on that. Steve, we'll go to you.
Alrighty, Steve, I've permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Well, I would just like to say that the Zoom meetings are something that we've gotten used to. It is a huge benefit to those of us that want to go to more than one meeting in a day. I hope that as this proceeds, there will be an option for your audience to watch the meetings by Zoom. Even though the Brown Act may require people to be present. And if we can help push that, I'd be glad to hear about it.
Excuse me, thank you, Steve. Next I have in line is Eris Weaver. Eris, I've permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Yeah, I would just echo Steve that, being able to do the meetings via Zoom, particularly for county-wide organizations such as yourself, really makes it more possibility of public involvement, right? If people don't have to come all the way to Santa Rosa, if they're in some other part of the county, not to mention the reduction in VMT and greenhouse gas emissions and all those things that we're trying to do less of. So I'm really hoping that there will still be, I'm a raging extrovert. I miss meetings in person, but I really think there's been a lot of positive to people being able to participate remotely. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Eris. Chair Rogers, I don't see any other members of the public who wish to speak.
All right, great. And Eris and Steve, I agree with you. And we'll be working with Suzanne once we kind of have a better feel for what the legal landscape looks like for us to figure out how we can move forward here as a regional body. With that, Suzanne, do you want to move on to 5.2?
I do. So 5.2 is just regional agency reports. If there are any board members from the regional boards, their districts, Sonoma Clean Power, Gate, who have reports, or MTC have reports out.
Melanie, do you want to give a brief update on changes that were made at SMART at the last meeting? Hint, hint, nudge, nudge.
Go right ahead, Chris.
Just updating the schedule for SMART. We added back in 10 of the train trips each day to better meet the need of the ridership. And so just a positive step in the right direction as we see more people coming back to public transit.
And Sunday is back.
And
So-
Sunday is back.
Oh, do you want to? So I was going to defer to you. It's like, oh, do you want to mention that they're suspending parking fees at some of the lots and seeing an increase in the use of the lots and probably ridership due to that?
I think that you got the gist of the update.
That's
there.
pretty much it. There you go.
Talk about it. So, Director Corsi, anything to add for SMART?
The two of you covered it great. Thanks.
Perfect. Director Giudice.
So I guess I'm supposed to report out on GGB. So bridge traffic remains depressed about 25%. Buses are off 70%. The ferries are off about that as well. We're increasing incrementally bus service and ferry service as we can. We are losing currently about $750,000 a week, which is down 25%. We were losing about $1 million a week, so we're excited about that. We have reached 4-year contracts with 24 bargaining units, so our labor negotiations are in the rearview mirror. However, our private pension program with ATU is still woefully underfunded at about 68%, and there's some structural issues with that private pension program. And finally, we are dabbling or talking about a hydrogen fuel cell ferry. It doesn't go very fast, only about 11 knots an hour, and will only hold 78 people, but it is a pilot program, and we will be launching that sometime next year. And progress is being made on the suicide barrier, and we're actively getting it installed. So that's the update from GGB.
Thank you, Director. And I will also mention we are syncing the SMART schedule up to better meet up with the ferry and the transit network as well. So keep an eye on that. Any other regional agency report outs? Let's go to public comment on item 5.2.
I do not see any members of the public who wish to speak on this item, Chair Rogers.
Okay, let's go to our advisory committee agenda reports.
No reports, Mr. Chair, just the agendas are in there for your perusal. If you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer them.
Okay, do you want to jump in on item 5.4 then?
Yes, I will start by handing it off to Ross to do the marketing and communications activities report.
Thank you, Suzanne. I'll give a brief verbal update. Good afternoon, directors. The April Marketing and Communications Activities Report covers 4 main topics, one of which we've already gotten into. On April 11th, our RCPA presented the Sonoma Climate Mobilization, a call to action webinar following a shortened board meeting. My previous report covered this workshop. The RCPA website rebuild was completed, which added functionality and ADA compliance to the site. The SCTA website was rebuilt in February. The RCPA is hosting a brand awareness survey for Sonoma Clean Power. An outside agency is required to sponsor the survey to ensure the results are impartial. Staff is responding to questions about the survey legitimacy and collecting physical surveys as they arrive. And we have actually had a fair amount of inquiries regarding the survey legitimacy. SCTA has collaborated with the transportation agencies in Marin, Napa, and Solano counties to promote the Commute 37 program. SCTA is helping to manage paid social media posts to get the word out about new rideshare opportunities on State Route 37. That's also being promoted in print and on radio as well. Staff promoted this program and other transportation programs at the in-person City of Santa Rosa Earth Day event on April 23rd. Social media outreach was up in April with promoted posts driving engagement on the Free Transit Day and Commute 37 program. That kind of increased numbers significantly. Please let me know if you have any questions on these or any other marketing, communications, or outreach activities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ross. Any questions from the board? Okay, let's keep moving.
All right, I'm going to hand it over to Chris Cohn, who's going to give the climate change activities report.
Good afternoon, board members. Yes, here's our report from RCPA. The City of Cloverdale launched its Water Upgrade Safe program on April 18th. To date, we have 17 single-family customers who have scheduled on-site assessments. City staff also distributed bilingual flyers at the recent Cloverdale Citrus Fair and Fire and Earthquake Safety Expo. And in addition, the program is going to be featured in the June issue of Cloverdale Connect, which is a local community paper that goes to every household in town. In the city of Sebastopol, Water Upgrade Save is working with a condo complex and expects to have as many as 22 condo owners enroll in the program. To date, Sebastopol has completed 45 single-family projects that are expected to save approximately 212,000 gallons of water every year. RCPA staff also presented to the SCTA Planning Advisory Committee on options for jurisdictions to adopt all electric reach codes or natural gas bans prior to the change of the building code standards in January 2023. RCPA is available to support jurisdictions that are interested in adopting reach codes, and technical support is available from BayREN and the State Codes and Standards Program. And finally, as part of its efforts to increase outreach to the Latinx community, RCPA staff worked with Sonoma Clean Power and the Sonoma County Energy and Sustainability Division to prepare and deliver a workshop on electric living at the Elevating Latino Voices to Heal Our Community from Climate Change annual event on April 14th. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Do we have any questions from board members? All right. Oh, go ahead, Melanie.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, Chris, I just wanted to thank you on behalf of the Cloverdale community. Sounds like we're off to a really good start. And then I just wanted to put in a bug in your ear for some co-marketing. It seems like the BayREN programs are really great to help people save water inside their building, but I know that Daily X is kicking off a rainwater collection program. And I was wondering if you were going to do any co-marketing with that rainwater collection grant opportunity and program.
That's a really great idea, and I will look into it. I was not aware that there was a new rainwater program in the works.
Yeah.
And later this year, we will be rolling out an outdoor offer from Water Upgrade Save as well.
Oh, great.
Which would be very complementary to a rainwater approach.
Oh, great. Thanks so much. And yeah, thanks again for, everything you've already accomplished on that front. We're definitely going to need it going into this drought season.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, I think we have James next.
Actually, it's Janet on the planning side.
Oh, there we go. Howdy, Janet.
Hi there. So for planning activities today, we have in data management and forecasting, model documentation and outputs are being packaged and uploaded to the modeling section of the SCTA website. Chris Barney is working with local staff on the development of the vehicle miles traveled mitigation and reduction calculator, and the draft tool will be reviewed later this month. I had a few items that were already covered in the community marketing and communications report. So that leaves, and several of our items were on the regular agenda. So lastly, I'd like to draw your attention to the many activities in the Safe Routes to School program that are listed in the planning activities report. That concludes my report. Thank you.
Board, do we have any questions or comments for Janet? All right, let's go to our last staff report.
James.
All right, the final report is the projects and programming activities report. I'll highlight just a few of the changes since the last report, starting with the Highway 101 widening in Petaluma, adding the carpool lane. The last piece of that southbound lane is on schedule to open this year. I do want to point out, though, in addition to the budget concerns that we had for support, the construction capital and right-of-way expenditures are now expected to exceed budget as well. The project team is working to address risks and options available to keep the project on schedule. The issues that are out there right now are construction access, sound wall drainage, winter storm damage, as well as the asphalt price index. So that's where with the price of fuel going up, there is a change order that compensates the contractor for that fluctuation in the price of oil that has changed since they bid the job. With that being said, also on the Highway 116, 121 on the consent calendar was the co-op amendment that was needed to make sure that Caltrans can advertise that project later this calendar year. Advertise it for construction. With regard to the SCTA funding program that the board took action on the guidelines today, that was previously called the 2021 SCTA funding program. So it has been rebranded as SCTA funding program Cycle 1. And we'll be very busy over the next month grading and ranking those applications that we received last year as we go through the schedule, bringing it to the board both in July and in September, and then to be fully finalized early next year after MTC confirms the OBAG candidates. The last thing I'll bring to the board's attention is on page 265 in the packet, which is some programming work that we were supporting all of the jurisdictions on with regard to the fiscal year 23 Federal Appropriations Act, specifically the community projects. Those jurisdictions that did submit projects for the community projects, the SCTA supported their applications. They're listed as Cotati State Route 116, Sebastopol Bodega Avenue bike lanes, the SCTA submittal for State Route 121, 12 8th Street, as well as the Smart Pathway in Southwest Santa Rosa. And that concludes the projects and programming activities report.
All right, thank you so much, James. Do we have any questions or comments for James? All right, Drew, let's go to public comment for our staff updates here, our SCTA RCPA activity reports. See if anybody has any questions or comments.
I do not see any members of the public who wish to speak on this item, Chair Rogers.
Okay, we'll bring it back then. Last item on our agenda is just announcements from board members. Does anybody have anything for the good of the order? We'll go to Director Giudice.
Thank you, Chair. Just really quick, I'm sure many of you heard that Roanoke Park has purchased the 30 acres that was the State Farm property. along the 101 corridor, right on the smart rail. And I want to thank, a shout out to all the fellow directors who have taken the promise of Roanoke Park tour with me, and all the nice people that you've introduced me to. It's been a lot of hard work advocating and really trying to lay the groundwork for this purchase to happen. And we're very lucky, and we're hoping that this is really going to give the Smart Line and Sonoma County that great transit-oriented development that will really reduce greenhouse gases and vehicle miles traveled. The property is fully entitled, and it includes 460 housing units as well as a downtown. And we're excited to get going. So any suggestions, comments, and anybody I should meet or you can introduce me to, I appreciate all of you and any assistance that you can provide as Roanoke Park will aggressively move forward now to develop the site. Thank you.
Congratulations, Director. I know
Thank
it's
you.
a huge thing for your community. Anybody have any other announcements? All right. Seeing none, Suzanne, we'll go ahead and adjourn for the day. Thank you, everybody. See you next month.